Hyperlexia is a misunderstood diagnosis, which hopefully today will shed some light on. Am I hyperlexic? No one's going to walk away being diagnosed as being hyperlexic. It disappears as you get older sometimes, or the symptoms show up different. I'm Nat, and I'm the head of community at an organization called Exceptional Individuals. Based in the UK, we support neurodiverse individuals, people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, and anything else that falls under that umbrella. We deliver these sessions out of goodwill because we work with corporates to help them become more inclusive. It's important that we spread the awareness on the strengths of having a differently wired mind. Today is going to be focusing on hyperlexia. There is a big overlap between autism and dyslexia. Hyperlexia is rarely a solo condition. It's normally co-occurring with another diagnosis. I always like to define what do I actually mean by neurodiversity. For those of you who do not know, the brain is amazing. We have cognitive variation and diversity. Society claimed that one way of thinking was the only way. Anyone who fell outside of a normal way of thinking was disabled. We've realized that's not true. And there's multiple ways to think differently. This is why we came up with the term neurodiverse. I'm not saying autism or dyslexia or dyspraxia can't be a disability. It absolutely can. But it's more of a societal disability that because we have not made reasonable adjustments or created systems in a certain way, that has disabled individuals. If you see here, these skills can be completely different depending on the individual. Some can have amazing skills, let's say in maths, might not be creative, great decision makers. It's that fluctuation of ability which defines neurodiverse. You've got to have those really high and low spikes. That will define whether or not you fall under the neurodiverse. Am I hyperlexic? If you are wondering for yourself, answer the questions as we go along. If not, do it from your child's perspective. I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of it is you who have it rather than as a child. So what is hyperlexia? Hyper just means better than, and lexia means reading or language. You think of dyslexia, dys, not being able to do, not being able to read or write very well, hyper, above average. Now, the critical signs of hyperlexia. So these are the things which, if you do not have, you're probably not hyperlexic. You have to have some area which has been slower to develop than the rest of the population, something which you find more challenging. You might struggle to process. It could be comprehension, content, anything along those lines. The next is ability to learn quickly. The positives is you can be way above your peers. Even 18-month-old babies have been able to learn to read extra fast, or you're ahead of your peers in terms of types of problem solving. A lot of children with hyperlexia has been shown to be amazing at solving puzzles, like 1,000 pieces of puzzles. There's even an instance of a child doing it all back to front, only solving it with the shapes. Jade says, emotional development is another key one. There's 3 different types of hyperlexia. And when we talk about hyperlexia, today we're predominantly going to be talking about number 3. The others will still relate, but you'll see why we'll talk about 3 mainly. And also there's the affinity for books. They might like reading. There's even been research that children have been able to learn multiple languages, yet still not actually comprehend what the words mean. Imagine that multiple languages at a young age, but lack the understanding of what the context is called the Einstein syndrome. And that mainly refers to individuals who struggle with speech at a young age, but are essentially a genius. Here are the 3 types. Hyperlexia 1 consists of neurotypical children who simply read early. If you just got a kid who is amazing at reading, ways of processing the world, then there's hyperlexia 2. Has autism and is fascinated with letters and numbers very early on. These are the common characteristics that professionals all agree on. I made a clear note to say has autism because autism and hyperlexia are not the same thing. There is a massive relation between the both. This is why if you have autism, those who struggle with socializing, communication, while still having abilities that far proceed their peers at an early age, this could be hyperlexia number 2. A common differentiator between hyperlexia 3 and autism is that those with autism may struggle with processing emotions, where hyperlexic 3 doesn't. Number 3 is autism-like syndrome, with a fascination with letters and numbers. The term autism-like is really important because when you ask yourself, how many people do you know who are diagnosed with hyperlexia? I'm going to imagine most of you don't know any. How many people have autism-like characteristics? A lot. Because a lot of people misdiagnose it as autism. Take, for instance, you're incredibly bright, but you have a delay in speech or communication at an early age. You'd be put in a special needs group. If you're not being challenged, your abilities get stampled on. With hyperlexia, typically as you get older, some of the challenges diminish, where autism, they're with you for life, though you can learn to get better at them. You've got all the potential, your mind is still growing and developing, yet you've been put in a class which doesn't challenge you. What was there to support you can actually stifle progression. If you are able to get diagnosed early on, it makes a big difference because the school system is where it gets most of us. Typically, what is it? 3 to 4 years old is when people typically get diagnosed. What isn't hyperlexia? Hyperlexia is not autism. People have to stop saying that. 84% of hyperlexia are on the autistic spectrum. Though it's not autism, it's really likely to be autism. You could have hyperlexia and not have autism. Some people think hyperlexia diminishes the autism when it isn't. It's about getting the correct diagnosis, which allows you to get the correct support in school. With the wrong diagnosis, it can severely impact your early years. 6 to 14% with autism are estimated to have hyperlexia. If you've got hyperlexia, very likely you have autism. If you have autism, not that likely you have hyperlexia. Hyperlexia is not dyslexia. Yes, they both got lexia in the title, but they're not the same. Hyperlexia can be the opposite to dyslexia. People with dyslexia usually might struggle with reading and writing, but what they have really good verbal communication skills. Their comprehension is hyperlexia might read early on, but they might not be able to understand it. They're very similar, but also whether or not you can be hyperlexic and dyslexic, I think you can. Hyperlexia is normally into 3 categories. One, gifted child. There is such a thing as a genius. A lot of the time, we like to say, oh, Bill Gates is autistic. He might be a genius. Some people are just really gifted. The next one is on the autistic spectrum. A lot of people who show signs of hyperlexia normally get classed as being autistic. Autism may require special attention to help them with communicating better. If they've got other challenges, normally rules out hyperlexia, unless we're talking about type 2. Lastly, you might be diagnosed with hyperlexia. May decode words quickly, but not comprehend what they're reading. Someone might show promise early on in life, but then they don't really develop in the way that you would expect. Then eventually in older age, they typically level out. April says, I'm not sure if Bill Gates has autism. He hasn't been officially diagnosed. He has stated he resonates with it. There is a danger in diagnosing people when you're not a professional. Defining who your role models are or who people look up to can be damaging. Jade says Eminem. He is a great candidate for that. Those are the basics. What does it actually look like? I'm going to give you some real world examples. Did you have an advanced ability to read words far beyond your age range? Yep, I loved reading. No, always disliked reading. I love reading now, but it took a long time to get to that state. One of the key characteristics of hyperlexia is a love for reading. Someone just picks up book, always fascinated by shapes and letters. Do you have difficulty in understanding verbal language? Yes or no, sometimes. You understand, hear the word, but you might not always comprehend it. So you might get confused in communications. Louise says, I love reading. I found it physically hard, both sounding words out, reading the letters, and once read it, understood it, and absorbing it. Diagnosed dyslexic, also reading books like Lord of the Rings, age 7. This overlaps with autism, but you can have one without the other. Philip says, my son uses speech/text recognition. All my emails are written out using my voice because I'm more proficiently than if I was to write. Difficulties in understanding verbal language, typically at a young age. Remember, people hyperlex in adults. I do not want to say it's not a thing, but there's not much evidence to draw any real conclusions. People with dyslexia, for instance, would have good verbal language. But now you read it, I've got some questions for you. China's one-child policy increases the country's wealth. Is this true, false, or possibly can't say? The true answer is you cannot say. If we actually went back to the writing, you would realize that you can't really draw that conclusion from it. This is an extreme example, but it's to give you some empathy of what it can be like. Imagine like a child reading The Hungry Caterpillar, but just didn't understand that eating food made the caterpillar fat. The passage suggests that 2-child families will dramatically increase as sibling-free adults reach childbearing age. Is this true, false, or can't say? It was false. The main criticism of China's one-child policy is that it violates human rights. Is it true, false, or cannot say? It cannot be said. What I wanted you to understand from this is that people can read. With dyslexia, they may struggle with comprehension. They might read a passage and physically they can read it, but they might struggle in terms of drawing information out of it. The same is true with hyperlexia, but hyperlexic people can find reading very easy from an early age. It doesn't mean that they're able to get the context from it. It's more about giving you a sense of empathy towards how someone can be a very intelligent reader, but it still doesn't mean that just because you can read it, you can understand it. This question is, what size of group do you prefer socializing and interacting with? Do you prefer being just by yourself, another person, some close friends, or a crowd? And this is one where a lot of people make the parallel between autism, because autism, if you break down the word, means people with hyperlexia and like their own company. The key difference is that where autism might have trouble connecting with other individuals, people with hyperlexia will hug, will chat, probably wouldn't have any challenges when it comes to relationships. You might have really strong interests like autism, a special gift in a certain area. You may struggle with understanding and types of communication. Being able to emotionally connect with someone is possible. How would you rate your social skills? For those with hyperlexia might be more personal. Comprehension might be slightly hit. Empathy and connections should be average, if not above. Communication might be a struggle in early years. Relationship management, that does tend to be a problem. Active listening is something which people with hyperlexia may struggle with. They can listen, but in terms of being able to take the information, process it, and be able to give a response which actually relates to what the person spoke about, that might be a challenge. Empathy, they should have no difficulty with it. This gives you an idea. The average person in this group would not be hyperlexic, but this is the average. Everyone's all over the place. Do any of you have any specific or unusual fears? This is something interesting that comes down to being able to process the world. Imagine you're able to read books about ghouls, ghosts, witches, wizards. Most people understand that's not real. Someone with hyperlexia, for instance, might have a very active imagination. Someone who you have to continuously remind, not true. Yes, there's a book about a unicorn, but it doesn't mean the unicorn's real. We've got small spaces, wasps, too much noise, bees, ghosts, heights, octopus, frogs. The thing about fears is most of the time, they're irrational. If we're at an edge of a cliff, you're going to be scared because there's a real chance of dying. If you're scared of a spider, that spider's not going to do anything to you, despite you knowing better. Apply that context to a child who has an ability to read at a high level, but struggles with the difference between fiction and fact. This can be quite dangerous at a young age if there's not like the right guidance. Do you have a favorite word or number? I hope you like my GIF. It doesn't have to mean anything. The sound of it, reading it, the shapes and the letters are fascinating. I love the number 23. I've always had a fixation with it. There's no real explanation for it, just the fact that I like it. This is common with hyperlexia. We've got 6, 9, Maximus, plunge, golfer. I like those words. 24/7, 87, 9, links 11, 26, portfolio, onomatopoeia. Quite often with children, they will come up with a word and they'll repeat it again. That's because the brain, with OCD or other things, the word can get locked on the brain. With hyperlexia, it's more the brain is fascinated by it. The lettering, the sound, they get enjoyment from repeating it. This is why the brain get locked on. When you hear a word or a phrase just spoken by another person, do you tend to repeat it or echo it? If someone says, oh, onomatopoeia, and you're like, the word is interesting to you. Regardless of the context, you'll repeat it. Regardless of the context. It doesn't matter what the word is. It could be highly inappropriate, but if you like the sound of it, great. Kenneth said, Sun is very challenged with other people, but has long-standing friendships with 2 or 3 online global by Discord. We all have different ways of communicating, and technology has been a massive lifeline for people who communicate in alternative ways. Some of my best mates I've met online, and it's becoming more and more normalized. Do you have an intense need to keep routines, difficulty with transition, or ritual behavior? Obsessive and ritual behavior is characterized when your free time and conversations is dominated by special interest or obsession. This is what people look for when it comes to Asperger's. It's just someone who's really interested in an area. That interest might come at the sacrifice of your personal awareness. The scientific term for repeating words or phrases is cholalia. A more simple term for it is parroting. When people are speaking, you listen selectively. Has your parents, when you were growing up, ever said, the words go in one ear, out the other, or you only hear what you want to hear? Or actually, it's said to husbands quite a lot. The real purpose of today is to cement in your head what is hyperlexia. More for me, I would say, is what it isn't. That's where the difference lies. Look at these images. Right now, remember them. What one is missing? The correct answer will slide. Well done. Someone who is diagnosed with hyperlexia would be good at this. If you have bits of puzzle pieces on the floor and you moved one away, or if they had a bunch of toys out and they turned their back and you took a toy away, they would probably know which one went missing. It's just the way that the brain processes information. It's able to really notice those things. Another example is, say if you read a book, but you missed out a word, and that was the child's favorite book, they would probably know you missed it out. Do you do self-stimulatory behavior? Do you do anything like flapping your arms, rocking, jumping? This is related to autism, hyperlexia, a way you got a lot of energy and you need to get it out. Some of us might swear, some might hit a wall. It's just expressing that built up energy. With hyperlexia and autism, it can be challenging to express yourself, or you have different ways of showing your excitement, frustration. It's a different way of communicating. The challenge is that the rest of the world might not have your dictionary. What does flapping mean? What does jumping mean? What does clicking mean? It's individual to the person. Do you think in concrete and literal terms, difficulty with abstract concept, if someone can't see it, if it's abstract, any sort of concept which you can't touch or feel, might be something which you find really difficult to wrap your heads around? An example is a child might struggle with the idea of Santa. That could be a great example. Do you have difficulty answering what questions, such as what, where, who, and why? You might be able to read something, say something, repeat something, but when it comes to pushing in on it, remember the questions we did about China? So a lot of you could read it, but when it came to what happened, why did it happen, where did it happen, these questions can be difficult. Try to avoid these types of words or think about how you can word a question differently. April says, I used to take certain phrases literally when I was younger. Nowadays, I sometimes take instructions literally, such as cutting ums and ahs out of videos. This sounds like you, or it sounds like your child, or someone you know. What can you actually do about it? Bad news, there isn't any specific test to diagnose it. It's not common enough for that to be a thing. A pediatrician or a family doctor will need other experts to diagnose it, who, if you want a diagnosis, be prepared. It's not going to be easy. A child psychologist, a behavioral therapist, a speech therapist, a special education teacher, a social worker, an occupational therapist. No, not one of these is able to diagnose it alone. They do not have a manual where they can say, tick, tick. It's more about discussions and how it affects you over time. You'd have to go for multiple meetings and sessions. My boyfriend is very fixed on literal interpretation. He has helped me speak clearly. Philip says, very talented at computer program and understanding artificial intelligence. That's a classic example of being really hyper-focused. Yes, you might miss the rest of the world around you, but what you focus on, you can go into far more detail. It's not very good at seeing the rest of the world, but it's very good at seeing that thing it's focusing on better than anyone else can. If you remember a few things from today, these are the key takeaways. If you read well at a young age, it doesn't mean you can't just say genius, hyperlexic. Or if someone's autistic, you can't just say, oh, they're hyperlexic because you like their name or it sounds cooler. Hyperlexia is a real condition, but it's also an incredibly rare one. If diagnosed with hyperlexia, it doesn't mean you're autistic. Hyperlexia is a co-occurring condition that goes hand in hand with another diagnosis. We love labels as a society, but sometimes you could just be a smart child, could just have a natural gift. You might just find some things harder than others. Not everything has to be a label. If you do not see a particular benefit, then I would ask yourself if it's really needed. For those who do not really need it, it's added baggage. Lastly, if any of you do want to get a diagnosis, go for it. But just know it's incredibly difficult because the amount of people who will have the understanding and knowledge is far and few between. That being said, why is it important that you attended today to do your own research? Because just knowing the characteristics and the signs and what to look out for can help make sense of your life or your children's life. A lot of people who are hyperlexic get unfairly diagnosed as Asperger's or autism, and that means they'll be treated in a certain way. You can have symptoms of Alzheimer's if you're really stressed. Now, if you get treated the same way an Alzheimer's patient gets treated if you are stressed, then the results aren't going to work. Autism-like means that how you demonstrate yourself is very similar. But if you apply the same techniques in terms of supporting someone with autism to someone with hyperlexia, do not expect that you're going to get the best results. It's like it, but it's not it. I think it's important to understand these concepts. Sometimes it's just knowing yourself. If you personally resonate with something, that's good enough. The vast majority of the people exceptional individuals work with are not diagnosed with any condition, but they resonate with dyslexia and dyspraxia. If they benefit from the support, it's not about knowing autism. Thanks, all. I hope you have a great rest of your day and been really great having you here.